Apostate Aladdin. Supposedly, he made another video where he supposedly debunks the Quran.
Today I'll focus on some arguments in the Quran.
I don't think you have the facilities for that, big man.
And you know, the problem with Apostate Aladdin is that he's pretentious.
What I hope I'm doing is empowering you to research and think.
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
So let's see what he says, and then I'll make my response.
Today I'll focus on some arguments in the Quran that are either so bad I cannot believe God would make them, or so bad that they can be used against Islam.
Daddy, chill.
Let's start with Ibrahim's hate for idolatry and polytheism. According to the Islamic narrative, Ibrahim was a monotheist, a believer in one God, despite his father and the people around him being idolaters and polytheists. In verse 74 of Surah Al-An'am, Ibrahim said to his father, "Do you take idols as gods? Indeed, I see you and your people to be in manifest error." If this is supposed to be generalizing polytheism and idolatry as concepts, then this is false. Most people who pray with or to idols don't believe that the object in front of them is actually a deity or a god, but a representation or a conduit to the god.
Okay, just to explain this verse is not saying that the pagans literally believed that the idols they worshipped were actual gods. According to Ibn Kathir, here God means worshipping something other than Allah. This doesn't mean that the Quran is implying that the pagans believed these idols to literally be gods. For example, in the Quran, chapter 25, verse 43, it says, "Have you seen the one who takes as his God his own desire?" Here, Quran literally says people's desire are gods. Does it mean people's desire are gods? No, it's simply a metaphor. Same thing here. As a matter of fact, Ibrahim's story later clarified this when the pagans admit the idols are just objects. So these idols were symbolic. However, the Quran never claimed these idols are literally gods, so this is a straw man.
And in this verse, Ibrahim says it more explicitly, "Do you worship what you carve?" Now, I can't speak for the people of Ibrahim. Maybe there were people who believed that the statues they made and prayed to were gods, but they don't think a man-made statue is literally a powerful god. So no, generally polytheists do not worship what they carve. The Quran tends to misrepresent an opponent's position in order to make it easier to argue against. That is called arguing against a straw man.
So it's ironic that he's saying that Ibrahim a.s. is strawmanning their position, when in reality he's the one who's strawmanning Ibrahim a.s. Ibrahim a.s. never said that these statues are actual gods that they worship, or they believe that these statues are actual gods. He never said that. He's simply saying that you're worshipping something that you create with your own hand. You're taking partners with God, because you're going to it instead of God.
Again, going back to Quran chapter 21, verse 65, the pagans admit to Ibrahim that the idols cannot speak, meaning these idols are symbolic. So the Quran acknowledged that the idols are symbolic. So when Aladdin says Quran is implying pagans literally think idols are literal gods, it's just a pathetic straw man.
The Quran tends to misrepresent.
You serious?
And when the Quran does engage with an idea, it sometimes does so poorly. For example, in these verses, the Quran argues against the possibility of multiple gods by claiming that the earth and the heavens would be ruined if there were more than one God. No elaboration on why. Objectively, this is not even an argument, just a claim. But when Muslims repeat this, they say that multiple gods would clash because there can only be one most powerful God. Even if I consider that version of it to be an argument, it is a poor one. Because firstly, if gods are beyond our powers and comprehension, why do we imagine them with the personality of an arrogant human king? Why can't they be so divine and perfect that they know how to share and not fight?
Brother asked a very good question.
Well, if there are two gods, they would, destroy each other. But why would they destroy each other? They would destroy each other because conceptually speaking, it's logically impossible. It would create a logical contradiction. One way you can prove something to be not possible is by showing that there is a contradiction. So does the concept of two gods leads to contradiction or inconsistency? The answer is yes. That's because, let's say there is God A, and he's the most powerful being in existence. Then there's God B, he's also the most powerful being in existence. There's a problem here. If A is the most powerful God in existence, then it logically follows that B cannot be the most powerful God in existence. And if B is the most powerful God in existence, A cannot be the most powerful God in existence. It's a logical contradiction. That means that they're both the most powerful being in existence and not at the same time. That's why they would destroy each other. Well, maybe they're like demigods and they're not all powerful and they just share like 50-50 power. In that case, they're not perfect, right? Because their powers have to be shared with each other. If something has to be shared, they can't be perfect. If they're not perfect, they can be God.
In a similar vein, when Ibrahim asks why they worship the idols, they said that this is what we found our fathers doing. which is the same mechanism behind why most Muslims are Muslim, by birth and indoctrination. If Allah understands this bias that most humans will have towards their religion of birth, how is it fair that He tortures a polytheist for being indoctrinated, but not a Muslim?
Stop it. Get some help.
And he doesn't even understand why the Quran is bringing this up. The reason the Quran is bringing this up is because they're using this as an argument, and it's not a good argument. And even you would agree that this is not a good argument, right? Like if I said, I believe Islam is true simply because my father followed it, and say that's the reason you should follow it too because my father followed it, that would be a bad argument, right? That's not what the Quran is saying. The Quran has other arguments for why Islam is true. The Quran is simply bringing this up to show how they refuse to think, right? Because the thing is that Islam promotes logical and rational thinking. As a matter of fact, throughout the Quran, you'll find constantly verses that constantly tells you to think. That's the problem here. They're not thinking. Now, if Muslims are saying the same thing, they're going against the Quran because the Quran tells us to think.
Anyway, the polytheists didn't harm Ibrahim. They just kept doing their thing. But Islam is not very pro-freedom of religion, so in this verse, Ibrahim swore to himself that he will plot against the idols when the worshippers weren't around. Very brave. And so he did. He smashed their idols. Now, why would Allah come up with a story that might inspire Muslims to behave that way? To feel morally justified to destroy someone else's property because they won't convert to Islam?
This noodle brain doesn't understand that under atheism, there's no difference between you smashing a statue or you smashing your brother's head.
The woman was too stunned to speak.
If you believe in materialism, then what is the difference between you smashing a statue versus you smashing someone's head? They're both atoms at the end of the day. So why do we have an issue if Muslims smash statues? But I'm not saying what I hesitate is good thing. Of course, from an Islamic point of view, they have no right to do that, right? They're in someone else's territory and they're destroying someone else's property. Obviously, that's bad. But my point is that as an atheist, how does this noodle brain, how does he make an objection to it? Right? That's something you need to explain. You need to explain your moral position. Like, how do you justify this? You can't just make moral claims to make the Muslims seem the bad guy when you have no moral justification for why you're passing off this moral judgment.
And if a believer thinks that God's not protecting stone statues as proof they don't exist, then what about Allah's inaction when stone and flesh are broken in His holy house? I mean, armed invasion aside, in 2015, a construction crane near the Kaaba fell on Muslims and killed and injured hundreds. The government blamed it on the wind, but who controls the wind? Supposedly Allah. So if you think destroyed idols means no deities, then by the same token, destroyed Kaaba means no protector, no Allah. Violence and bloody deaths in Allah's house means no Allah. Or to quote Ibrahim in this verse, why do you worship what does not benefit you or harm you? Oops, friendly fire.
How are they the same thing? Can you explain, how are these two things the same? The reason Ibrahim is telling them, why are you worshipping things that brings you no benefit is because they're literally worshipping inanimate objects. Inanimate objects don't bring them any benefit. It's not that they didn't believe that God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't exist, but they take partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So he's simply asking them, why are you worshipping inanimate objects that brings you no benefit? When it comes to the story of the crane, when it comes to Muslims where the crane fell down, Muslims don't worship the crane. Muslims also don't worship the wind, right? As for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already told us that He will test us, right? That the world will not be easy. It's a testing ground. So there's no contradiction here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does bring us benefit. The whole reason I exist is because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The whole reason I can see is because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The whole reason I can eat is because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything in existence is thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what's the benefit of an inanimate object that you create yourself? That's the question being asked. And he says that, these two things are the same. He is committing the faulty comparison fallacy. These two has nothing to do with each other. Allah does bring us benefit, but the stone statues does not. It does nothing for us. How are they the same thing?
Now the noodle brain could argue that, maybe the pagan deities also bring them benefit. However, that would be a strawman since that's not their position. They don't deny that Allah exists, so they agree that Allah Almighty brings them benefit, yet they worship something other than Him because they saw their fathers do it. I mean, by this logic, if their parents commits murder, then that would also be justified. Clearly, that cannot be a valid reason to worship something that has no benefit.
What I hope I'm doing is empowering you to research and think.
Yeah, come to London and let me slap your face.
The verses. These ones demonstrate Ibrahim's process of elimination to arrive at monotheism. During the night, he saw a star, and he said, "That is my God." When the star set, he said, "I do not like those that disappear." The same thing happened with the moon and then with the sun. Ibrahim said to his people, I am free from what you associate with Allah. First of all, stars and the sun and the moon do not just disappear, as in cease to exist. They're just out of our field of view because we live on a rotating sphere. But Ibrahim and Allah seemingly didn't know that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be such a big deal to Ibrahim that they disappear. Gods are under no obligation to show themselves to us 24/7, so what if they're just out of view? A powerful God would still be able to perceive us and affect us even if we cannot see it. Secondly, if appearing and never disappearing are criteria for divinity, then Allah is not a God, because He does not appear. And to quote Ibrahim, لا أحب الآفلين. I do not like those that disappear.
You're a fool, with all due respect.
His point is not that they disappeared, therefore they're not God. That's, again, is not what he's saying. He's again strawmanning. The reason he's bringing this up is because at the time, they worshipped these stars along with Allah. Okay? They took partners with God. So he's simply saying, why would I worship something that doesn't seem like it has agency of its own, right? It seems like it's just going on a circle on a regular basis, but it doesn't seem like it brings us any benefit. Same thing with the statues. That's his thought process. He's thinking, why are these things being worshipped along with Allah? See, with Allah, we can see things happening, right? We can see Him giving life, Him growing crops, right? All these things. But what's the benefit of something that doesn't seem to have its own agency?
Summary, the verses say, the polytheists argued with Ibrahim, and he said, do you argue with me when Allah has guided me? I do not fear your gods, only my Lord can harm me. And how could I fear them when you don't fear that you're committing shirk with Allah? And that was our conclusive argument which we gave Ibrahim against his people. I'm sorry, what was the argument? Let me break this down for you. How could you argue with me when Allah has guided me? Ibrahim was the one who was arguing with them. My brother in humanity, you asked. That's like if a Christian went to a mosque and kept telling everyone to stop praying to Allah because Islam is false. And when the Muslims engage and argue back, he says, why are you arguing with me when Jesus already guided me?
And he contradicts himself. Before, when he read the verse, it literally says,
the polytheists argued with Ibrahim.
In Quran 6:80, it says, and his people argued with him. So he literally read this, right? And it literally says that they started arguing with him first. And then he says, oh no, you started arguing with them first.
How could you argue with me when Allah has guided me? Ibrahim was the one who was arguing with them. The polytheists argued with Ibrahim. The polytheists argued with Ibrahim.
The polytheists argued with Ibrahim.
No. It literally says that they argued with him first. Like, can you not read? Can you not read English? Stop embarrassing yourself.
Then to paraphrase the rest of the verses, how could I fear your puny gods when you don't fear my GigaChat God? And I'm not the one calling this an argument. The verse explicitly says that was our conclusive argument.
And no, the Quran is not saying that, why are you worshiping this puny God instead of this big God, right? That's not what the Quran is saying. Let's read the verse, right? In Quran 681, it says, and how should I fear what you associate while you do not fear that you have associated with Allah, that for which He has not sent down to you any authority? That's the argument. That's the conclusive argument, which is that you have no justification for shirk. And that's his point. That was the conclusive argument that Ibrahim was making. He's asking them for evidence and they don't have any evidence. They're just doing something blindly. They're refusing to think. That's the point. And you missed this point.
Such an ignorant, lying coward.
Secondly, if Ibrahim is talking to people who acknowledge Allah as a big God and then a bunch of other small gods, then maybe within that belief system he can say that only the biggest and the baddest is worthy of worship. But if the Quran is meant for all people at all times, which it is, then it is posing this argument to polytheists in general, and it's a terrible argument. If I'm a polytheist and Ibrahim tells me I should be afraid because I'm committing a thought crime in his religion, I'd say, cool, I don't care because I don't believe what you're telling me is real. Similarly, if I'm a Muslim and someone says that according to their beliefs, I'm going to hell for eating meat, I'd say, cool, I don't care because I don't believe what you're telling me is real. So how is this verse in any way an argument, let alone a conclusive one?
The polytheists could simply say, well, that's your belief. I don't have to believe what you believe, right? No, they do have to believe what he believes because they claim to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They claim to believe in this greater God. So where's the justification from that greater God that this other God should be worshipped? Where's that? The point of the story is that you have to think. You cannot just blindly believe what your forefathers believe. And that's what the Quran says. Quran constantly tells us to think. And this is something you guys refuse to do. Because you don't even try to think when you're reading these verses. You're busy trying to win and have gotcha moments and win arguments against the Quran. but you're not actually reading the Quran. But anyway, so yeah, thank you guys for watching the video. If you guys like the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and please do subscribe to the channel. It helps the channel a lot. And if you want to support me, you can support me by becoming a Patreon. Inshallah, see you guys next time. Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.